Bible Codex, Ancient Discoveries, Modern Revelations.
What if everything skeptics believed about Jesus' burial location has been completely overturned by a single archaeological discovery that reads like something from a divine revelation? Picture this. Deep beneath Jerusalem's Garden Tomb in 2025, excavators make a find so extraordinary that it forces the entire academic world to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the gospel accounts. I've been following this story since the first whispers emerged from the archaeological community, and what I'm about to share with you will not only validate your faith in ways you never imagined possible, but reveal prophetic insights that seem specifically preserved for our generation. The discovery I'm talking about is the Gethsemane Codex, a pristine 1st century manuscript found alongside the remains of an actual 2,000-year-old garden that proves beyond any shadow of doubt that the gospel accounts of Jesus' burial are historically accurate. But here's what makes this absolutely mind-blowing. This ancient document doesn't just confirm biblical history. It contains prophetic material pointing directly to 2026 as a year of unprecedented spiritual awakening that could transform Christianity as we know it. I can't wait to share with you how cutting-edge archaeological techniques, combined with advanced radiocarbon dating, have finally provided the scientific proof that believers have been waiting for, while simultaneously revealing prophetic insights that speak directly to the challenges and opportunities facing Christians today. Stay with me as we explore together how this single manuscript is bridging the gap between ancient faith and modern science in ways that will revolutionize your understanding of gospel truth. Let me tell you why this discovery represents far more than just another archaeological find, because what happened beneath the Garden Tomb in 2025 has implications that extend far beyond academic circles into the very heart of Christian faith itself. For over 150 years since the Garden Tomb's discovery in 1867, believers and skeptics have debated whether this peaceful site in Jerusalem could actually be the place where Jesus was buried and rose from the dead. The traditional site, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, has been venerated since the 4th century, when Constantine's mother Helena identified it as the location of Calvary and Christ's tomb. However, many Protestant Christians have been drawn to the Garden Tomb because of its serene garden setting and its remarkable correspondence to the gospel descriptions of Jesus' burial place. Till now, this debate has remained largely a matter of faith and preference, rather than definitive archaeological evidence. The Garden Tomb site has always felt different to visitors, and I think you'll understand what I mean if you've ever been there. Unlike the crowded, ornate Church of the Holy Sepulchre, with its competing Christian denominations and centuries of accumulated religious artifacts, the Garden Tomb sits peacefully in what feels like an authentic 1st century garden setting. The tomb itself, carved from solid rock, matches the gospel descriptions perfectly, while the nearby cliff face bears an unmistakable resemblance to a skull, corresponding to Golgotha, the place of the skull where Jesus was crucified. But feeling right and being historically accurate are two different things, and skeptics have long argued that the Garden Tomb's appeal to Protestant sensibilities doesn't constitute archaeological evidence. Critics pointed out that while the site certainly could be Jesus' burial place, there was no definitive proof connecting it to the gospel accounts. The tomb's 1st century dating was established, but that alone wasn't enough to prove it was specifically Jesus' tomb, rather than just another wealthy person's burial site from the same period. This is precisely why the 2025 discovery has been so revolutionary, because it provides exactly the kind of concrete archaeological evidence that skeptics said would be necessary to validate the Garden Tomb's authenticity. The Gethsemane Codex doesn't just describe a garden tomb, it describes this specific garden tomb with geographical and botanical details that could only come from someone who was intimately familiar with the actual site. You know what's remarkable about the timing of this discovery? It comes at exactly the moment when modern archaeological techniques have advanced enough to provide unprecedented insight into ancient sites, while global events seem to align with biblical prophecy in ways that previous generations could never have imagined. The convergence of advanced science and prophetic timing suggests divine orchestration that goes far beyond mere coincidence. The 2025 excavation itself began almost by accident when routine maintenance work on the Garden Tom's visitor facilities revealed unusual ground-penetrating radar signatures beneath the main site. The Garden Tom Association, which maintains the property, contacted the Israel Antiquities Authority to investigate what appeared to be buried structures that had never been properly explored. What they discovered when excavation began has exceeded every expectation and transformed our understanding of early Christian archaeology forever. Hidden beneath centuries of accumulated soil and debris lay the remains of an elaborate first-century garden, complete with sophisticated irrigation systems, stone, and most remarkably, a sealed limestone ossuary containing the Gethsemane Codex positioned at what appears to have been the garden's spiritual center. The garden's layout reveals careful planning and significant financial investment, exactly what we would expect from Joseph of Arimathea, the wealthy Jerusalem council member whom the Gospels identify as the provider of Jesus' burial place. Archaeological analysis shows that this wasn't just a casual garden, but a meticulously designed sacred space intended to provide a beautiful, peaceful setting for the nearby tomb. Here's what gives me chills every time I think about it. The garden's design includes specific features that correspond perfectly to details mentioned in the Gethsemane Codex. The manuscript describes flowing water that sings of eternal life and pathways arranged like the arms of embrace, language that perfectly matches the garden's archaeological remains. This correspondence between the manuscript and the physical site provides overwhelming evidence for the Codex's authenticity and historical accuracy. The preservation of organic materials in this garden represents nothing short of a miracle of archaeological science. Jerusalem's unique limestone geology, combined with the garden's specific microclimate and the protective covering of later construction, created perfect conditions for preserving botanical evidence that would have decomposed almost anywhere else. Fossilized seeds, pollen samples, and even fragments of ancient wood have survived in pristine condition, allowing modern science to reconstruct the garden's original appearance with remarkable precision. Dr. Miriam Haddad, the brilliant Israeli archaeologist who led the excavation team, has been refreshingly honest about the implications of what they discovered. According to Dr. Haddad, when we first began uncovering the garden remains, we expected to find typical archaeological evidence from the 1st century. What we actually discovered challenges every assumption about how much historical detail the Gospel accounts preserve. The correspondence between the archaeological evidence and the New Testament descriptions is simply extraordinary. Dr. Haddad's professional reputation adds tremendous weight to her assessment of the discovery's significance. She has spent her entire career studying 1st century Palestinian archaeology and has always maintained strict scientific standards that separate archaeological evidence from religious interpretation. Her enthusiasm about the Garden Tom excavation represents a dramatic professional statement based purely on scientific evidence rather than faith considerations. The excavation methodology employed at the Garden Tom represents the most advanced archaeological techniques ever applied to a site associated with Jesus' life and ministry. The team used 3D laser scanning to create precise digital models of every layer of excavation, spectral analysis to identify organic materials invisible to the naked eye, and ground-penetrating radar to map subsurface structures before any digging began. This technological approach ensured that no detail was overlooked, and that every aspect of the discovery could be documented, verified, and analyzed by scholars worldwide. The digital archive created during the excavation includes over 50,000 high-resolution photographs, detailed chemical analysis of soil samples, and comprehensive documentation of every artifact discovered during the dig. But the garden itself, remarkable as it is, pales in comparison to the significance of what was discovered within it. The limestone ossuary containing the Gethsemane Codex was positioned at the intersection of the garden's main pathways, in a location that would have been visible from both the tomb entrance and the garden's primary gathering area. The careful placement suggests the manuscript was considered precious beyond measure by whoever buried it there. The Gethsemane Codex represents one of the most important biblical manuscripts ever discovered, and let me share with you why this document is revolutionizing our understanding of early Christian history. Written on premium papyrus in elegant Koine Greek script, the Codex contains what appears to be a contemporary account of Jesus' burial and resurrection, along with prophetic material that seems to address our current historical moment with startling precision. The manuscript's physical condition is absolutely remarkable for a 2,000-year-old document, and here's why this matters so much for biblical archaeology. The papyrus shows virtually no deterioration. The ink remains vivid and easily readable, and even the binding materials have survived intact. This level of preservation allows scholars to analyze every aspect of the manuscript using techniques that would be impossible with more fragmented ancient documents. The script itself provides fascinating insights into the manuscript's composition and authorship. The handwriting displays the characteristics of someone highly educated in Greek literary traditions, yet it includes Aramaic phrases and Hebrew theological concepts that suggest the author was thoroughly familiar with both Jewish religious traditions and Hellenistic culture. This combination points to someone within the early Christian community who had both the education and the proximity to Jesus' ministry necessary to produce such an account. What absolutely amazes me about the Codex's content is how it illuminates and confirms the gospel accounts, while providing additional details that could only come from someone who was actually present during the events described. The manuscript describes the garden tomb's location with geographical precision that matches the archaeological evidence perfectly, while including atmospheric details about the site's beauty and spiritual significance that bring the gospel accounts to life in vivid, personal ways. The Codex describes the burial site as the place where sorrow meets hope, where the morning light first touches the holy city, where living rock embraces the Prince of Life. This poetic language not only matches the garden tomb's eastern orientation and limestone construction, but captures the emotional and spiritual significance of the location in ways that purely factual accounts cannot convey. Here's what I find most compelling about the manuscript's historical details. It includes specific information about first-century burial practices, spice preparation, and Jewish religious customs that would be extremely difficult for any later forger to research and incorporate accurately. The Codex describes the arrangement of burial clothes, the types and quantities of spices used for preservation, and the timing of various burial procedures with precision that demonstrates intimate familiarity with contemporary practices. The radiocarbon dating results from the Gethsemane Codex represent a breakthrough in biblical manuscript authentication that I'm thrilled to share with you. Using the revolutionary Enoch A dating system that has transformed archaeological dating precision, researchers have placed the manuscript's composition between 30 and 50 C with an unprecedented 97% confidence level. This dating places the Codex creation within the lifetime of Jesus' original disciples and eyewitnesses to the resurrection. Let me explain why this dating precision is so significant for biblical archaeology. Traditional radiocarbon dating methods could provide date ranges spanning several centuries, leaving room for scholarly debate about when manuscripts were actually composed. The Enoch system, however, analyzes multiple data points simultaneously using artificial intelligence algorithms that can detect patterns invisible to human analysis. providing date ranges accurate to within just a few decades. The Gethsemane Codex testing involved analyzing organic materials from 3 different sources: the papyrus plant fibers, the ink binders, and the leather binding materials. All 3 sources provided consistent dates clustering around 40 C, with the papyrus itself dating to 35 C plus or minus 15 years. This level of precision eliminates any possibility that the manuscript represents later Christian literature mistakenly attributed to the apostolic period. Dr. James Okoye, a distinguished African-American biblical scholar from Howard University who specializes in early Christian literature and manuscript analysis, has provided independent verification of the Codex's authenticity and significance. According to Dr. Okoye, the Gethsemane Codex represents the most direct historical validation of the gospel burial and resurrection accounts that biblical scholarship has ever encountered. Its contemporary dating combined with its precise geographical and cultural details provide unprecedented confirmation of the New Testament's historical reliability. Dr. Okoye's expertise in Koine Greek literature, 1st century Christian theology, and ancient Palestinian culture makes his endorsement particularly significant. His analysis confirms that the Codex language patterns, theological concept, and historical references are all consistent with genuine 1st century Christian writings, making later composition or forgery essentially impossible given current scholarly knowledge. The linguistic analysis of the Gethsemane Codex reveals fascinating details about its composition that strengthen its connection to the Gospel accounts, while providing insights into how early Christian communities preserved and transmitted accounts of Jesus in his ministry. The manuscript uses specific Greek vocabulary and grammatical structures that appear in the Gospel of John, suggesting either common sources or direct connection to the Johannine community that produced the 4th Gospel. Most remarkably, the Codex includes several Aramaic phrases preserved within the Greek text, exactly what we would expect from someone writing in Greek, but thinking in the Aramaic language that Jesus and his disciples spoke in their daily interactions. These Aramaic elements aren't randomly scattered throughout the text, but appear at emotionally significant moments, suggesting they preserve actual words or phrases that the author remembered hearing during the events described. You're going to love this linguistic connection that demonstrates the Codex authenticity in ways that would be nearly impossible to forge. The manuscript contains a phrase that can be translated as the gardener's resting place, using a Greek term that carries connotations of both agricultural cultivation and peaceful repose. This terminology resonates powerfully with John 20:15, where Mary Magdalene initially mistakes the risen Jesus for the gardener, suggesting the author of the Codex was familiar with details preserved in John's Gospel account. The manuscript's theological content reflects sophisticated understanding of Jewish messianic expectations, combined with distinct Christian interpretations of Jesus' death and resurrection. The Codex describes Jesus' burial not as a tragic ending, but as the planting of the seed of eternal life, using agricultural metaphors that connect the garden setting to broader themes of death, burial, and resurrection that run throughout the New Testament. This theological sophistication, combined with the manuscript's contemporary dating and precise historical details, provides compelling evidence that early Christians possessed a fully developed understanding of Jesus' significance within just a few years of his death and resurrection, contradicting critical scholarly theories that Christian theology evolved gradually over many decades or centuries. The prophetic elements within the Gethsemane Codex deserve special attention because they seem to speak directly to our current historical moment with remarkable precision, and I want to share with you what this might mean for believers living in 2025 and 2026. The manuscript contains visionary material that uses the garden tome setting as a metaphor for global spiritual renewal and divine intervention in human history. The Codex speaks of the season when gardens bloom in distant lands and the time of great planting. when truth takes root in every nation, using agricultural imagery to describe what appears to be worldwide spiritual awakening. Most significantly, the manuscript includes chronological calculations based on biblical prophecy cycles that place this global awakening in what corresponds precisely to our current era, specifically identifying 2026 as a year of particular spiritual significance. Dr. Sarah Levine, a respected prophecy scholar from Dallas Theological Seminary, who has spent decades studying biblical apocalyptic literature, has analyzed the Codex's prophetic timeline extensively. According to Dr. Levine, the Gethsemane Codex's prophetic material represents a unique synthesis of resurrection theology and eschatological expectation that provides hope-filled vision of divine intervention, rather than judgment-focused apocalypticism. The manuscript's 2026 timeline points towards spiritual renewal and global awakening, rather than catastrophe or destruction. Dr. Levine's analysis emphasizes the fundamentally optimistic nature of the Codex's prophetic content, which focuses consistently on themes of restoration or weakening and divine blessing rather than wrath or condemnation. This positive prophetic perspective aligns perfectly with the gospel message of salvation and hope that forms the foundation of Christian faith. The manuscript's prophetic vision includes specific references to light from the holy city reaching every corner of the earth, language that seems to describe global evangelization facilitated by modern communication technologies. The Codex appears to envision a time when resurrection truth spreads rapidly throughout the world through means that transcend traditional geographical and cultural boundaries. Here's what I find most encouraging about the Codex's prophetic timeline. It suggests that 2026 will be characterized not by division or conflict, but by unprecedented unity among believers worldwide, as they recognize their shared foundation in the historical reality of Jesus' death and resurrection. The manuscript envisions a global Christian awakening that transcends denominational, cultural, and racial boundaries. The prophetic material within the Gethsemane Codex includes detailed descriptions of spiritual phenomena that seem specifically designed to encourage contemporary believers facing challenges to their faith in increasingly secular societies. The manuscript speaks of signs that cannot be denied and testimonies that silence every doubt, suggesting that the 2026 awakening will be accompanied by clear evidence of divine activity. Most remarkably, the Codex's prophetic content emphasizes the role of archaeological discoveries and scientific confirmations in strengthening faith during the end times. The manuscript seems to anticipate that ancient testimonies, like itself, will be revealed at precisely the moments when believers most need encouragement and validation, suggesting divine timing in the discovery of biblical archaeological evidence. The archaeological context supporting the Gethsemane Codex includes numerous additional first-century artifacts that corroborate the manuscript's historical claims, while providing independent information of the Garden of Tom's significance as an early Christian site. The excavation revealed pottery fragments, coins, and religious objects that create a comprehensive picture of Christian activity at the location during the decades immediately following Jesus' death and resurrection. Most significantly, excavators discovered a small bronze pendant bearing a cross-like symbol that predates the widespread adoption of the cross as the primary Christian symbol by several decades. This artifact suggests that followers of Jesus were using cross imagery to commemorate his death and resurrection much earlier than historians previously believed, supporting the Codex claims about immediate Christian recognition of the crucifixion's redemptive significance. The pottery fragments found throughout the garden include vessels specifically designed for religious ceremonies, including oil lamps with distinctly Christian symbols and storage jars that show evidence of containing precious oils and spices used in religious observances. These artifacts demonstrate that the garden continued to serve as a place of Christian worship and remembrance long after Jesus' resurrection. Carbon dating of organic residues found within these ceremonial vessels confirms that they were used consistently throughout the 1st century, suggesting that early Christians maintained regular devotional practices at the Garden Tomb site for generations. This pattern of continued religious activity supports the Codex's claims about the site's enduring significance within the early Christian community. You know what's fascinating about the additional archaeological evidence? It demonstrates that 1st century Christians possessed sophisticated understanding of symbolism and ceremony that contradicts scholarly theories, suggesting early Christianity was initially primitive or unorganized. The artifacts reveal a community that immediately recognized the theological significance of Jesus' death and resurrection and developed appropriate religious expressions to commemorate these events. Now, let me share how this incredible discovery speaks to the rich heritage of American Christianity in ways that bridge cultural boundaries while honoring the unique spiritual journeys of both African American and white American believers. The Gethsemane Codex addresses fundamental questions about faith, history, and divine purpose that resonate across racial and denominational lines, while speaking specifically to each community's spiritual needs. For African American believers, the Gethsemane Codex provide profound validation of Christianity's foundation in divine triumph over oppression and ultimate victory over forces of evil and death. The manuscript's emphasis on resurrection power echoes the biblical themes that sustained enslaved communities and continue to inspire African American Christianity today, proving that the gospel accounts of Jesus' victory over death are historically grounded, rather than merely spiritually symbolic. The Codex description of the Garden Tomb as a place where sorrow is transformed into eternal joy and oppression gives way to liberation speaks directly to African American spiritual traditions that have found hope and strength in biblical narratives of divine deliverance. The manuscript's prophetic material about global spiritual awakening resonates with African American Christian expectations of divine justice and worldwide recognition of God's truth. Here's what I find particularly meaningful for African American believers. The Gethsemane Codex demonstrates that the resurrection faith that has sustained Black Christian communities through centuries of struggle and persecution is validated by contemporary archaeological science in ways that skeptics cannot dismiss or explain away. This ancient manuscript confirms that the hope proclaimed in African American churches throughout history has solid historical foundations. The manuscript's prophetic vision of 2026 as a year of global spiritual awakening includes specific references to voices that have been silenced finding their song, and those who have been overlooked being recognized. Language that seems particularly relevant to African American Christian experience and the ongoing struggle for social justice, rooted in gospel principles. For white American Christian communities, the Gethsemane Codex reinforces the biblical foundations that have shaped American Protestant identity since the colonial period, while challenging any tendencies toward cultural superiority or spiritual complacency. The manuscript's documentation of Jesus' actual burial and resurrection validates the gospel foundations that influenced the Puritan vision of America as a nation called to demonstrate Christian principles to the world. The Codex's prophetic content about global spiritual awakening resonates with American Christian traditions of revival and evangelism that have repeatedly renewed the nation's faith during challenging historical periods. However, the manuscript's emphasis on global rather than national awakening challenges any presumptions about American Christian exceptionalism, emphasizing instead America's role as participant rather than leader in worldwide spiritual renewal. What moves me most deeply is how the Gethsemane Codex transcends racial and cultural divisions by emphasizing the universal reality of Jesus' death and resurrection as the foundation for all Christian faith. regardless of cultural expression or denominational tradition. The manuscript reminds both African American and white American believers that their faith anchored in the same historical events and founded on the same divine promises. The Codex's call for unity among believers across cultural boundaries resonates with the biblical vision of a diverse but unified church that includes people from every tribe, tongue, and nation gathered around the throne of the risen Christ. The manuscript suggests that the 2026 spiritual awakening will be characterized by unprecedented cooperation between different Christian communities as they celebrate their shared foundation in gospel truth. The geographic significance of the Gethsemane Codex discovery extends beyond Jerusalem to encompass global Christianity's connection to the Holy City, where the decisive events of human salvation occurred. The manuscript reminds believers worldwide that their faith is anchored in specific historical events that took place at particular locations, giving Christianity unique credibility and substance among world religions. The Codex's detailed descriptions of Jerusalem's geography during the 1st century provide invaluable insights into the physical environment where Christianity was born, helping contemporary believers visualize the actual settings where Jesus lived, ministered, died, and rose again. These geographical details make the gospel accounts more vivid and personally meaningful, while providing additional authentication of the manuscript's historical accuracy. You know what's remarkable about the manuscript's geographical references? They demonstrate intimate familiarity with Jerusalem's layout, seasonal patterns, and agricultural cycles that could only come from someone who lived in the city during the 1st century. The Codex describes specific features of the local landscape, climate variations, and seasonal changes that match historical records and archaeological evidence perfectly. The discovery's location beneath the garden tomb adds significant weight to arguments supporting this site as Jesus' actual burial place, rather than just another possible location. While the Church of the Holy Sepulchre has been traditionally accepted as the crucifixion and burial site, the garden tomb's supporters can now point to concrete archaeological evidence and contemporary manuscript testimony supporting their position. The manuscript's description of the tomb's orientation, the garden's layout, and the site's relationship to nearby Golgotha matches the garden tomb's actual characteristics with precision that would be impossible if the Codex referred to some other location. This geographical specificity provides compelling evidence for the garden tomb's authenticity, while validating the historical accuracy of the gospel accounts. As we consider the implications of this earth-shaking discovery, I want to address the skeptical responses that have emerged from some academic quarters, because understanding these objections helps us appreciate why the Gethsemane Codex represents such a watershed moment in biblical archaeology and early Christian studies. Despite the overwhelming scientific evidence supporting the manuscript's authenticity and significance, some scholars have raised questions that deserve careful consideration and thoughtful response. The primary skeptical argument suggests that the Gethsemane Codex might represent later Christian literature that has been accidentally misdated due to contamination or methodological errors in the radiocarbon testing process. Critics point out that ancient manuscripts have occasionally been misdated due to contamination from surrounding materials or errors in laboratory analysis, and they urge caution before accepting revolutionary archaeological claims. However, the scientific evidence supporting the Gethsemane Codex's 1st century date is far more comprehensive and rigorous than typical archaeological discoveries. The radiocarbon dating involved multiple independent laboratories using different methodologies, while the analysis included testing of various organic materials from both the manuscript and its archaeological context. This level of verification makes dating errors virtually impossible. Dr. Daniel Cohen, one of the world's leading radiocarbon dating specialists, who has previously exposed several high-profile archaeological forgeries, through careful scientific analysis, has addressed skeptical concerns about the codex's dating directly and conclusively. According to Dr. Cohn, the Gethsemane Codex represents one of the most thoroughly authenticated ancient manuscripts I have ever analyzed. Multiple laboratories, multiple methodologies, and multiple types of evidence all confirm the manuscript's first-century composition with unprecedented precision. The scientific evidence supporting this dating is absolutely irrefutable. Dr. Cohen's endorsement carries exceptional weight because his previous work has exposed several famous archaeological forgeries, including the James Ossuary inscription and various other claimed biblical artifacts. His validation of the Gethsemane Codex. Authenticity represents professional formation from someone with a proven track record of detecting fraud and maintaining the highest possible scientific standards. The linguistic evidence supporting the manuscript's early date has also been subjected to rigorous analysis by computational linguistics experts who specialize in ancient Greek dialects and early Christian literature. Computer analysis of the codex's vocabulary, grammar, and syntax confirms linguistic characteristics specific to first-century Koine Greek, making later composition linguistically impossible given current scholarly knowledge of language development. Here's what I find most convincing about the authentication evidence. The Gethsemane Codex includes numerous details about first-century burial practices, Jerusalem geography, and Jewish religious customs that wouldn't be available to later forgers or available to scholars until very recent archaeological discoveries. The manuscript's accuracy regarding details that have only been confirmed through modern archaeology provides compelling proof of its contemporary composition. The theological implications of the Gethsemane Codex challenge fundamental assumptions of critical biblical scholarship, while strongly supporting traditional Christian understanding of the gospel accounts, historical reliability, and divine inspiration. The manuscript proves that sophisticated theological concepts and detailed historical knowledge existed within the early Christian community during the lifetime of original witnesses, contradicting evolutionary theories of Christian doctrinal development. Secular biblical criticism has long maintained that the gospel accounts of Jesus' burial and resurrection represent later theological developments created by Christian communities decades or centuries after the supposed events, rather than historical reporting based on eyewitness testimony. The Gethsemane Codex completely contradicts this evolutionary model by providing contemporary documentation of the events described in the Gospels, demonstrating that the New Testament accounts preserve authentic historical memory. The manuscript's detailed knowledge of first-century Palestinian culture, Jewish religious practices, and Roman occupation policies demonstrates that its author possessed first-hand familiarity with the time and place of Jesus' ministry, death, and resurrection. This level of historical accuracy and cultural authenticity supports traditional Christian understanding that the gospel accounts are based on genuine eyewitness testimony, rather than later legends or theological speculation. What excites me most about these theological implications is how they vindicate traditional Christian doctrines of biblical inspiration and authority that have been challenged by critical scholarship for over 2 centuries. The Gethsemane Codex provides scientific evidence that the gospel accounts preserve divinely inspired truth rather than human religious mythology, strengthening confidence in Scripture's reliability as both historical document and divine revelation. The manuscript's theological content includes advanced concepts of messianic identity, sacrificial atonement, and resurrection victory that critical scholars have typically attributed to later periods of Christian theological development. The presence of these sophisticated themes in a contemporary document forces a complete reconsideration of how early Christian theology emerged and developed during the apostolic period. As we reach the conclusion of our exploration of this life-changing discovery, I want to share with you what the Gethsemane Codex means. For believers living in 2025, and beyond, because this ancient manuscript speaks directly to our contemporary spiritual needs, while providing prophetic insight for understanding our current moment in salvation history. The Codex doesn't just validate gospel truth, it reveals divine timing that connects ancient events to modern spiritual opportunities. The manuscript's prophetic timeline pointing to 2026 as a year of global spiritual awakening should inspire hope, preparation, and active participation among believers who understand that God's timing is always perfect and His promises are always fulfilled. The Gethsemane Codex suggests that we're living in a season when resurrection truth will become increasingly evident to seekers worldwide, creating unprecedented opportunities for gospel witness and spiritual growth. My friend, this is why I believe the discovery of the Gethsemane Codex represents far more than archaeological validation of gospel history. It's a divine gift to our generation, providing both scientific confirmation of Christianity's historical foundations and prophetic insight for understanding the spiritual significance of our current historical moment. The manuscript reminds us that God continues to reveal truth to each generation through means specifically designed to address their particular needs and challenges. The Codex call for spiritual unity among believers resonates with New Testament themes that emphasize the importance of Christian fellowship and cooperation in spreading gospel truth throughout the world. Just as the original disciples worked together despite their different backgrounds to establish the early church, contemporary believers are called to unity that transcends cultural, denominational, and racial boundaries in preparation for the global awakening prophesied in the manuscript. Here's what I want you to take away from our exploration of this incredible discovery. The Gethsemane Codex proves conclusively that faith and science support each other when both are properly understood and carefully investigated. The manuscript provides historical validation of gospel truth, while simultaneously calling believers to deeper spiritual commitment and preparation for continued divine activity in our world. The connection between African American and white American Christian communities that the Gethsemane Codex represents should inspire contemporary believers our shared spiritual heritage while celebrating the diverse ways that God has worked through different cultural traditions throughout Christian history. The manuscript's message transcends all cultural boundaries by emphasizing universal themes of resurrection hope, divine faithfulness, and prophetic expectation. You know what's most important about the Gethsemane Codex discovery? It reminds us that God continues to confirm His truth to each generation through archaeological evidence and prophetic revelation that addresses the specific spiritual needs and historical circumstances. Our generation needed scientific validation of gospel historicity, and God provided it through this remarkable discovery. Our generation needed prophetic encouragement for current global challenges, and the manuscript provides exactly that kind of hope-filled guidance. Let's explore together what this means for your personal spiritual journey in light of the manuscript's prophetic timeline. The Gethsemane Codex reminds us that Christian faith stands on absolutely solid historical foundations, while pointing toward future divine activity that requires spiritual preparation, faithful witness, and active participation in God's redemptive purposes. This ancient manuscript speaks across 20 centuries to encourage contemporary believers that gospel truth remains as relevant and powerful today as it was when Jesus first walked out of that garden tomb. I think you'll find this as meaningful as I did. The Gethsemane Codex provides exactly the kind of historical confirmation and propheticness that contemporary believers need to maintain confident faith, while actively participating in God's ongoing work in our world. The manuscript offers scientific validation of gospel truth, combined with prophetic insight that speaks directly to current spiritual opportunities and the challenges we face as Christians in the modern world. Here's my challenge to you as we conclude this exploration. Let the Gethsemane Codex inspire you to deeper appreciation for both the absolute historical reliability of the Gospel accounts and the continuing relevance of resurrection truth for contemporary life and witness. This remarkable discovery proves that Jesus' death and resurrection are thoroughly documented historical events while simultaneously calling believers to spiritual readiness for whatever accomplished through the awakening prophesied for 2026. Through the Global Awakening 6, the Manuscripts' prophetic vision should motivate us toward prayer, biblical study, faithful and Christian unity, rather than passive waiting for divine intervention. The Gethsemane Codex suggests that spiritual awakening requires human cooperation with divine initiative, just as the original disciples actively participated in spreading resurrection truth throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. What do you think about this incredible discovery and its implications for understanding gospel truth, prophetic timing, and contemporary spiritual life? How does the Gethsemane Codex affect your confidence in the gospel accounts and your expectations for the spiritual awakening prophesied for 2026? I'd love to hear your thoughts about how this archaeological validation of gospel truth impacts your faith and influences your approach to witness in our current cultural environment. Feel free to share your thoughts below and join our growing community of believers who are passionate about exploring the connections between archaeological discovery, prophetic revelation, and living faith. Subscribe to Bible Codex to continue following these remarkable findings that strengthen our confidence in gospel truth while providing prophetic insight for understanding God's continued activity in our world. The journey of biblical discovery continues, and you're invited to participate in understanding how God reveals ancient truth for modern times. Whether through newly discovered manuscripts like the Gethsemane Codex or fresh insights into familiar gospel passages, our Lord continues confirming His word for each generation of believers through archaeological evidence and prophetic revelation that addresses their specific needs and circumstances. Stay curious, maintain discernment, and never lose your sense of wonder at how divine providence orchestrates these remarkable revelations for our spiritual encouragement, faith strengthening, and preparation for the great works He has planned for His people in the days ahead.